Good morning. I know that in the light of the recent violent events in this country and around the world, that many of you may be feeling less than secure right now. I've talked to a number of you, I know that. It is indeed a dreadful situation, and we would be truly naive, Pollyanna-ish, and downright wrong not to be concerned. We must find solutions to these kinds of problems. This is not normal, and it cannot be accepted on any level. Yet, I offer you hope. We also need to be aware that there is something else happening just a little bit behind the scenes, something that is not as apparent in the media. A critical mass of Americans are now getting actively involved in the process of finding a better, a more peaceful, and more intelligent way to live. These eruptions of violence are waking up a sleeping giant. It's almost reminiscent of the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941. It is causing all of us to wake up. The media is concentrating on the sensational and the violent events. That's what sells. And we need to know that there is a whole lot more going on behind the scenes than what's being presented to us. Millions of Americans and people all around the world have just about had it, and they are doing a lot to bring about change. There are groups forming, there are workshops being held, there are peace dinners taking place. We're talking about having one here at Unity in a few months. Books are being written. I'm in the middle of 3 of them right now. And social media is racing through millions of households with the details about all these positive happenings. People are donating their time, their money, their expertise, and even their blood to aid the cause and the victims of recent violence. And they intelligently are working on effective, and they're not being emotional about it, but they're working on these solutions. Someone said recently, we need a movement of evolutionaries to midwife a new chapter in American history. More and more citizens are creating something magnificent out of our country, something that lights up the world. And it looks like this is truly happening. Yes, there has been recent violence here and in France and now in Germany and elsewhere, but look also at the lesser publicized events that are now unfolding to make this world a better place. First, Pope Francis is changing the spiritual tone of the Catholic Church and taking many practical steps to eliminate the corruption in the Vatican Bank and its control, along with other banks of the world financial system. He's reorganizing the church bureaucracy with each department now under the guidance and watchful eye of more enlightened leaders. He's also taking strong stands on the environment and climate change and the acceptance of all people as children of God. Secondly, chemical trail spraying from airplanes is being reduced by laws aimed at protecting the health of humans. This goes totally against what some huge companies have lobbied and fought for in order to become more profitable at our expense. Many people are now boycotting GMO foods and other products that they deem unhealthy and even cruel to consume. Third, over 2,000 CEOs and CFOs of banks, hedge fund managers, or top-level official financial executives have resigned, been indicted, or arrested, which is 10 times the normal attrition rate. This is primarily because of their involvement in improper dealings. Fourth, an ever-increasing number of whistleblowers are coming out and sharing information about corruption in every institution, resulting in many successful prosecutions. Think Bernie Madoff, WikiLeaks. The public is demanding propriety in every area. 5, there's much skepticism about the official explanations of such events as the bailouts of the corrupt banking system, the 1% getting rich off of wars due to investments in arms and military equipment, etc. This is an example of public awakening. And last, look at the uprising of humanity against corruption and injustice in many countries worldwide, such as Egypt, Libya, and the Ukraine. People everywhere are demanding freedom, equality, opportunity for themselves, and peace for everyone. And the recent violence in Baton Rouge and elsewhere has awakened a significant number of people to the critical need that we have to do something to promote peace, love, and acceptance, which starts right here in our own hearts with our families, our friends, and our colleagues. And just think how this idea could spread. Never underestimate the power of your positive vibrations and your example to others, one person at a time. We just need to stay awake to how we can be a part of this more enlightened approach to life. Americans are on the leading edge of a new operating system of peace and justice in our country. There have been upgrades since 1776, of course, but a powerful operating system of peace and fairness is now happening. I think it's a movement waiting and ready to just burst forth on the scene as powerfully as the laptop and iPhone phenomenon did, with just as much power to connect us all. Have faith. Do your part wherever and however possible. And remember that as bitter as some lemons are, we can and have made lemonade out of them. And we can make sure that the victims of violence did not die in vain. How? By correcting the violence in our own hearts toward any of God's children, our spiritual sisters and brothers. I feel sure that Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore would offer us much hope today if he were here, as he understood the positive good that we can affect by tuning in to the channel of the one power and the one presence of the universe. He knew that by focusing totally on the good and visualizing things like peace and praying about it, certainly in our own lives and eventually in our surroundings, it would come to pass. So what brought Charles Fillmore to that kind of amazing comprehension of truth? Knowing that we can evince good out of anything that is going on, anytime. This truth that he taught and that Unity teaches has been passed down from time immemorial through the Egyptian mystery schools, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Sufism, the Essenes, the Kabbalah, and Judaism, and finally through Christianity. It is an eternal truth, as old as the universe, the truth that love and unity make all things possible. To better understand this eternal wisdom and Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore, who distilled it for us, let's continue with his life story. Last week we saw a young boy who endured a lost childhood, essentially. He was abandoned by his father, hard work, little formal education because he had to support his mother, and much illness due to a terrible crippling accident. Now, to continue the story. At first, after 10-year-old Charles's accident that left him critically ill with one leg 4 inches shorter than the other, it was hard to be still after having been so active as a young boy. He read everything in sight and he did all the lessons that his teacher sent home with his brother, but life was still pretty boring and frustrating. He wanted to be outdoors like every normal young boy. He wanted to visit the Indians that he had met with his father. He wanted to be with other people. He wanted to be doing things. Finally, the day came when he was strong enough to go back to school. Then almost immediately, his brother left. Charles and his mother, who had been through so much with Charles while he was ill, were on their own. As Charles saw it, school was no longer an option. Although his mother earned a little as a dressmaker for the women who had moved into the area, he realized that he had to go out and make money if the two of them were going to make it at all. He convinced a local printer to take him on as a printer's devil. He did odd jobs around the printing plant in return for a small wage and the opportunity to learn the trade. It was difficult for him at first, especially with his injured leg, but he soon began to enjoy the work as well as the income that he could take home to help his mother. Printing presses and the printing process had not changed much since they were invented almost 400 years earlier. So Charles was learning pretty much the same things that Benjamin Franklin had learned in Boston and London. As a printer's devil, Charles learned all the tricks of the trade. His curiosity drove him to observe everything and to ask all kinds of questions. He learned how to set the paper and crank that big handle, applying just the right amount of pressure to ensure that the ink had been spread across the letter blocks that would leave an impression without smearing all over it. He also learned how to set the letter blocks in their racks, spacing them just right to fit the margins on the page. He learned how to cut the paper into folios or mini books of 32 pages that would be stitched together into the actual books and then bounded at the bindery. He also learned how to figure out how much a job would cost and how to ship the product to the customer. And he got to read everything they printed. It was fascinating. And you'll see later that this really helped him when he started at Unity Village and started printing all the books that we now have. But working with the printer, learning to set the type or letters to be printed on the big press and checking or proofing these pages for errors made him very aware of how far behind he was in grammar and spelling. He struggled hard to get these things right. Then a neighbor made an offer. She was homeschooling her son and knew that her boy would do better if he had someone to work with. Would Charles be willing to join them? He could help a little around her house in return for the lessons, and they could meet when he wasn't needed at the printing plant. It was the perfect solution. His friend's mother was one of the few women at that time with a teaching degree. She had graduated from the 2-year teacher's program at Oberlin College, and she knew how to keep these boys aware, interested, and enthusiastic. More power to her, huh? She taught them about nature and the classics, poetry, history, and legends from the ancient Greeks and Romans, making those ancient heroes part of their dreams and everyday life. Then she introduced them to Shakespeare and helped them bring the characters alive by speaking those rhyming verses alive and aloud with them. More poetry, more essays from modern American transcendentalist writers, including Ralph Waldo Emerson, Walt Whitman, and Henry David Thoreau, rounded out their literary education. As you probably know, New Thought was very influenced by the Transcendentalists. Charles loved the way those men talked about the glories of nature. She also taught them mathematics, algebra, geometry, and just enough trigonometry so they could figure out how to build a building. Then she introduced them to biology, chemistry, physics of the day, starting an interest in science that lasted for the rest of Charles's life. Charles and his friend worked together at the kitchen table and often pushed each other to do better and better. During those years, Charles moved on from the printing plant to work in the local grocery store and then the bank, each time learning all that he could about the business as well as his particular job. He learned how to keep accounts and to manage cash, which later served him very well, and about the importance of maintaining good credit. All the energy that Charles had once put into his sports and hunting, he now put into his studies, his jobs, and strengthening his injured and shrunken leg. They were long days, beginning at dawn with the chores to help his mother and then ending with late nights of studying. But he enjoyed them, and he even began to dream of the life that he would build for himself. To be continued next week. Gotta come back. As you can see, Charles Fillmore's life was full of adversity, yet he used every adverse condition to grow and to learn. Every setback was turned into a stepping stone, and he later taught that we can all do the same thing. We can all use our trials and tribulations to develop our life skill muscles. Charles learned how to chisel that hard block of marble that was his life into the beautiful statue that we admire so much. Let's fast forward to some of the wisdom that Charles's life produced. 1, Charles tells us there is a creative force constantly at work in us and in all creation, but it is often not recognized. Later, he made it clear that we can access these creative forces. All of us can. The Bible says many are called, but few are chosen. This means that all people are called, but few choose to plug in to the God force of life. Few want to let go of their individual ego selves and let the Christ live through them. Jesus said, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself. In other words, give up your little self, your ego self, and tap into the big creative force or your higher self, and let it do your bidding. Success and opportunities will follow. In Philippians 4:6, the Bible states, have no anxiety about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And remember, God knows your needs before you ask. The reason to pray is not to quicken God's awareness, but rather to quicken your awareness of God's never failing, all providing abundance, so that you will then see better ways, the ways that He offers us to attain it, so that you will recognize the opportunities when they're there, which they will be and are. Secondly, and related to the first, there is a higher dimension of reality that we can live in, heaven on earth, if you will. And that level is where the answers to all of our problems lie. Therein is where our faculties are sharpened so that we use everything, kind of like in judo, to our advantage, as it is also the advantage of all concerned. Fillmore said, with the spiritual faculty, it is possible for man to penetrate into the fourth dimension, or what is usually called the kingdom of heaven, and to discern the spiritual forces. That dimension exists. The open and receptive mind can see through the things that take place in the Christ mind, thus transcending the capacity of the unillumined natural man. He called to our attention the Bible story of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding feast. The pots were filled to the brim, remember, with water, and then they were turned to wine just when the wine was needed. Metaphysically, water, Fillmore said, may be compared to man's natural or human life, and wine to his spiritual life. We are called upon to convert what is in our natural life into spiritual matter at our wedding of the natural and spiritual dimension of our lives, our wedding. The marriage that took place in Cana of Galilee thus symbolizes our marriage or union in which we convert ourselves by joining with higher consciousness. Our lives are thus wedded with the divine level of life and become one. 3, Fillmore did not think that it was through the intellect that we could realize our oneness with God, but through first-hand experience. True, Fillmore studied the classics. He read the great ideas. He met with holy men like Yogananda and others and spoke about profound truths with some of the most committed spiritual seekers of his day. But, he said, the fact is, truth cannot be imparted. It must be individually experienced. The presence of divine mind in the soul cannot be told in words. It can be hinted at and referred to and likened to this and that, but it can never really be described as it is. To bring forth the kingdom of heaven, our ideas must be one with divine ideas, and that idea must be the law that is the standard of our lives. And he reiterated, as I will now, that to do this we only need to pray, to sit in the silence, and declare our freedom from programmed ideas through visualization, repetition. Fillmore said that by undoing mental blocks and by living in the Christ, we will have dominion over every thought and word, which will result in a more peaceful life. Like all great teachings, the point is very practical: to reduce suffering and create joy, abundance, and peace in our lives and in the world. In closing, I offer you hope. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore overcame poverty, disease, abandonment, and a grade school formal education and turned it into vast learning, worldly success, health, and happiness. And he assured us that we can all do the same. And I urge you to have hope in terms of your life and our country. If our great nation gained its independence from what was in 1776 one of the strongest nations with the greatest navy in the world, Great Britain, not to mention its later subduing the lawless Wild West and winning 2 world wars, we too will find solutions to the recent random violence. These are small sparks compared to the huge fires that we have already put out. Let's all pray daily, visualize peace, and band together as a nation and as a world to midwife the best operating system our nation and planet has ever seen. One of love, peace, and unity. The unity, love, and peace that Charles Fillmore and all spiritual teachers have taught. Please join in with the critical mass of people who know, like Charles Fillmore knew, that it is possible through self-transformation and peaceful means. Amen.